aquí tienen un smartphone? Who here has a smartphone?
Yo no.
Si se puede participar en este ejercicio, por favor, if you can just participate in this exercise, please. Doesn't matter, no es necesario. Hay un espacio que se llama algo como configuración o settings en inglés. Si se puede tocar configuración o settings, depende del tipo de smartphone que tiene. Y después hay información que dice general. Hay like a button that says something like general. ¿Ya? ¿Estamos juntos?
Vale.
General. Y después de general, en español dice información. So probably the next button after general in English will say information. Si se puede tocar información, you can push information. ¿Sí? ¿Vale? Ok. Y después hay un botón que dice algo como aviso legal en español, like legal advice en inglés. Legal advice in English. Regulatory advice. Okay. Y la próxima página, the next page, says something like at the bottom, exposición a RF, so exposure to radio frequencies. ¿Quién aquí es un fumador? Who here is a smoker? ¿Tienes un paquete de cigarros, por favor? Okay. Información muy directa sobre los riesgos de fumar, aquí, ¿no? Information very clear about the dangers of smoking. Here is a person having their heart resuscitated. Aquí es una persona que tiene su corazón que está al punto de resucitar como una advertencia sobre los riesgos que confronta el pobre Juan. Juan está terminando su adicción nicotina, ¿no?
Este verano.
Claro. Mi punto es eso, que para explorar estos peligros en tu smartphone, to explore these dangers in your smartphone, se debe pasar mucho tiempo buscando la información, que ya la tecnología del dispositivo tiene esta información. Yes, this device contains this information, it's all there for you, pero se debe buscar en una manera un poco difícil. Who here had done that before? ¿Quién aquí había antes nadie, ¿no? Pero en el contexto de tú, gracias señor, pero en general no es una práctica, ¿no? Entonces, mi punto es eso. So my point is this, that in terms of media theory, estamos en un momento en la teoría mediática en donde se dice que hay una utopía a causa de la comunicación digital y móvil. We're in this moment of a supposed utopia of mobile communication. Pero la realidad es muy diferente. The reality is very different. Que estos dispositivos son peligrosos para nosotros como usuarios y trabajadores. These devices are dangerous for us as users and workers. Son peligrosos para las personas quienes están fabricando los dispositivos. These devices are dangerous for the people who are manufacturing them. Y hablo de esa manera sobre los trabajadores quienes están trabajando en esclavitud en Congo. I'm speaking here of people who are working as slaves in Congo, en las minas, para obtener los recursos necesarios para todos los CPU. People who are working in slavery in Congo to obtain the resources necessary for all central processing units. Estoy hablando sobre las personas, muchas son mujeres, en China sobre todo, pero también en México y en otras partes, ¿no?, del mundo, quienes están fabricando estos dispositivos y otras tecnologías de comunicación. The people who are actually manufacturing these devices in factories in China, in Mexico, and other parts of the world, quienes están experimentando los dos grupos problemas horribles de cáncer y de otras enfermedades, people who are experiencing terrible diseases, cancer, many others, reproductive issues and so on. Y después de nuestra historia con esos como usuarios, after our story of living with these devices, llegan a ser lo que se llama basura electrónica. They become what is known as electronic waste. Y otra vez hay personas en el sector informal quienes están trabajando en Nigeria, en Ghana, en Brasil, en Malasia, en México, en muchas partes del mundo. After we finish with them, they become this electronic waste. They become the property temporarily of workers in the informal sector who are doing recycling of these devices in various parts of the world, which include Brazil, Mexico, China, India, West Africa. Entonces, la idea que son una utopía para nosotros a través del mundo, the idea that these present a utopia for us across the world, que es la política oficial de la Unión Internacional de Telecomunicación, que es la política oficial del Banco Mundial, the idea of this utopia for all of us, that is the official policy of the World Bank, the official policy of the International Telecommunications Union, y también es como el punto principal sobre comunicaciones en la cobertura en la prensa burguesa. That is also the crucial point of coverage of these devices in the bourgeois media. Es una mentira, it's a lie. These are dangerous devices, esos son dispositivos peligrosos. Tienen sus usos, por supuesto, yo tengo uno de ellos. They have their uses, of course I have one. But they are a part of the fantasy of a theory of communication that is driven by the idea of technological advance. Son una parte de la fantasía de comunicación, de la teoría de comunicación, que está dirigida, dinamizada, ¿no?, por la fantasía de desarrollo tecnológico como la respuesta a todos los problemas de pobreza, de desigualdad, de sexismo, etcétera, etcétera. Un punto, de una manera muy corto, es que debemos problematizar estos dispositivos en términos de su historia total de creación, de uso y de vida post-uso, post-consumo. That we need to problematize these devices in terms of their use, in terms of their creation, their use, and their post-consumer life. Gracias, thank you.
Sorry, Toby, can I just invite you to consider the possibility of, in the creation, go one step before, and the mining companies that have to set the mines to get the minerals to create the mobiles and all the pollution and all the death that they are causing?
He said the Congo, but yeah.
How do we want to go next?
I like the idea of starting with a question. So I'm going to start with two questions, actually. The first one is, ¿cuántas personas me entienden cuando estoy hablando en español? Para poder seguir mi...
¿O cuántas no?
No, I'm just speaking. ¿Cuántas? Claramente, por favor. Okay. How many people can follow what I'm speaking in English? Did anyone just knock the second time? Is there anyone who really doesn't understand a word of English and can't follow this discussion in English?
En español.
Okay. No, I need to answer that question. Well, alguien no entiende absolutamente nada de inglés, no puede seguir las intervenciones en inglés. Okay, nobody. Right. You said to me at the beginning of this panel was going to be in Spanish. I have absolutely no problem speaking in English. I have absolutely no problem speaking in Spanish. But one of the reasons we're running an hour late and the people who are visiting me in Madrid this weekend are going to miss my presence at lunch is because we've been doing this in two languages. When we have data, when we have information, we can take better decisions. I work on getting access to information so that we can take decisions. In this case, my decision is that I'm not going to speak in Spanish. No disrespect to being in Spain or the people whose mother tongue is Spanish, but I just think that right now that's the best decision. So just to comment on that. It was very interesting what you were saying about the mobile phones and looking at the... I'm a great fan of reading labels, health warnings. I immediately went to the while you were doing that, I went to the World Health Organization page and looked at a couple of other scientific articles about the negative effects of mobile phones. It's really important if we're going to have an informed discussion about the technology we're using and its potential harms, to really be very well equipped with the facts. How harmful are our mobile phones for us? Well, it seems like the jury's still out on that, but there isn't enough evidence, and I've looked at this before, it's not the first time I've looked at this. There isn't enough evidence to really make me worry. How harmful is it for the environment, for the people working, mining the minerals, those are very genuine questions, and I totally agree. There's some really serious consideration that we need about our responsibilities as consumers in terms of the devices we use. There is actually a company in the Netherlands called Fairphone, which makes mobile phones entirely from ethically sourced materials. I have a friend here in Madrid who has one. Unfortunately, when part of it broke, it took 6 months to get the replacement part, and he actually gave up and bought a Samsung, which wasn't that great, but he was trying to do the right thing. So yes, if we're informed, we're able to take better choices. What I work on is getting access to information from generally public bodies that hold that information in order that civil society organizations can do their campaigns better. We had an example this morning, you were talking, I think, about the Madrid Central. It would be impossible for us to be able to have that debate about whether or not we want to limit cars coming into the centre of Madrid, which has been a very hot debate over the last few weeks, and this past week in particular, if we didn't have the data. And the data is collected by public bodies. And there was a time in the previous government of Madrid, about 6-7 years ago now, or the one previous to the previous one, where that data was not made public. And environmental organizations had to go out and collect their own data in parallel in order to be able to launch the discussion. Then we've had the official data about the contamination, the pollution in Madrid being made public, and that's enabled us to have a better discussion about that this week. I'm not sure that my perspective on that is necessarily answering your first question. Key elements of the digital media system. But because I work on the right of access to information more than on media or media freedom these days. But clearly, for us to be able to have, it was very interesting to listen to the discussions earlier about the sort of the difference between the media and the message, and what different communities need. Clearly, if we want to empower people and allow people to exercise their right of freedom of expression, to form an opinion and to express that opinion through any media of their choice without frontiers, as protected in the international treaties on the right of access to information, the right to communicate in that sense, we need to have information. And the very nice thing that's happened in the last 15 or so years is that the right of access to information has been recognized as a fundamental right by all the international human rights tribunals. So I can talk more about that, but those are my opening thoughts.
We'll also give a round of applause after the next speakers, but then we stop.
Yeah,
No,
it's nice though.
until
The
the end.
Saturday morning is nice.
So, okay. Hi, everyone. I kept thinking with this idea that once we have more information and more data, we take better decisions. I disagree with that idea.
Okay.
And actually, it made me think in a time I was in a... Skip that. This is, I think, it's kind of deterministic. I mean, we have more information, but we still agree with the terms and conditions. Perhaps because we don't have time. And maybe I can know that perhaps organic food is better for me, but I don't have the money to get it. So there are material conditions involved, and there are cultural positions that we are in between this idea that just because we have more information and more data, we take better decisions. In some cases, it is like that, or could be like that. Although this experience of asking you made me remember a moment I was in a conference in Argentina, and there was a presenter, he was Brazilian, and there were 2 Brazilian people in the room, and me. So he made the question, is everybody here okay if I speak in Portuguese? And I didn't want to blow his chance of speaking in Portuguese because I was the only one, so I was shy. So there are personal things involved when we take decisions. Of course I didn't understand a thing, but all the time I was like... And then I just remember the name of a city that he was talking about, Jorge Fora. I still remember that city, the name of the city. You see? I still remember. So, considering this is about media systems, I was answering this question, and I was all the time going back to the McBride report. Is what is in that report still applicable today? Yes, it is. So it's like we're, especially in the media, in media discussions and with technology, and we think that we're really cutting edge discussions, and we're living in a changing moment. But at some point, we having the same discussions that 40 years ago. So, in a nutshell, the Chilean mainstream media system is, of course, really neoliberal, right-wing, market-driven. The state has not a word, not an inch almost in this media system, with a very little space for community radios, really lean to gossip and scandals, and with certain openness, I would say, for what we can understand as primary definers. So with certain openness to different actors that were not present in the past. Although I would say that this is, of course, mainly because most of the media is driven by the logic of the click, right? With the clickbait. And these days I'm more aware of something that is happening, that this, what we can understand as quality information, you have to pay for it. So I'm wondering what are the consequences of having in this modern and liberal narrative of journalism, for instance, what does it mean to have this wall, this paywall to access good information? So I think there is an issue there, because it's getting more and more difficult to get access to good information. And this made me connect the Chilean case with the case of the Philippines, that I was close to this case because I was reading about the Philippines and some research there, and especially Filipino communities living abroad. And how do they get information about what's happening in the Philippines? They get access to the information mainly through Facebook. So, but I look at certain news providers if I'm using Facebook, and I take this political position. And other people, they access to other sort of information, and they don't accept what I read and my news source as valid. So what is happening over there is the fact that I not only believe what I read this because I believe it, and I want to believe it. So actually my information is correct, and yours is entirely wrong. I mean, it's not inaccurate, it's entirely wrong, it's fake. So this idea that what you're reading and your source of information is fake, so what you have to say about this is fake, it's not valid. And I'm thinking in agonistic terms, and following Chantal's idea, the fact that how are we going to find middle terms if what you're saying is entirely not wrong, it's invalid. So if I don't accept this as a part of a communicative exchange, there's a big problem. So just to end my intervention, have I seen something observing these issues in the Chilean context? Just a bit beyond the academic walls. The National Council of Culture and Arts in 2005, within their national policy, they thought it was needed to have a branch on TV, on media, right? Let's say have a cultural TV channel to address recognition, identity, and other things. It didn't happen. Since that point onwards, it was almost never touched, the idea of having this channel, except in the last year that actually the idea is watering down. And most interestingly, from my perspective, is the fact that in the new left, let's say what is happening with Podemos, or let's say Momentum, or different new young left parties, this is not a topic. The topic of a media reform is not even there. So why is it not even there? Just to name one little story. While conducting research on this topic, I asked one of the most salient leaders of the student movement in 2011, why you don't even care about this, or you don't touch it? And he said, because internet resolves everything. Okay. I can have my own newspaper on Twitter, and I can disseminate that information. So why do you need mainstream media or any intervention in the media system? Because I can, this kind of individualistic narrative, I can't solve it. Of course, it doesn't, he didn't resolve anything on his own, because I think it's different collective effort. So ultimately, this leads me back to think about current media alternative system. So what should have this media system? What is the normative framework of it? Is it democracy, participation, education, entertainment? Maybe all that. So is this new? Not at all. It gets back again to 1970s, 1980s. So how much have we moved on? Not that much, I would say.
Before I get into answering these questions, I think it would be helpful for you to maybe know a little bit about my background. I write mostly about propaganda. I live in Japan. I've been there for about 25 years. And my students, if you know anything about Japan, probably everyone knows the stereotypes. Good sushi, kimonos. Can you think of anything else? What are the popular stereotypes you think about Japan?
Sumo.
Sumo. So, but Japan is incredibly multicultural. And I live in an area of Japan called Okinawa. And a long time ago, it was its own kingdom. It was free to trade with China and Korea and the Philippines and mainland Japan. But in 1879, it was annexed by Satsuma clan. And the people of Okinawa have been struggling, the indigenous people have been struggling for many years to assert their rights as people, as human beings, as indigenous people who have a particular language and culture and history that they want to preserve, and also resurrect, because the native language has been decreasing, it's been dying off. Not only because of Tokyo's policies toward Okinawa, but also the American influence since World War II. So since I've been living there and teaching, I've been hearing so many of my students, young 18, 19-year-old students, complain about the conditions, the ongoing conditions in Okinawa, what Okinawans seem to be, many Okinawans seem to be, feel as though they're caught between two imperial powers, Washington and Tokyo. And they feel that their voices are just not heard. They can't participate in democracy because a new military base, they say, is being built in the northern part of the island. So many people are seeing a resurgence of militarism in Okinawa, and Okinawan people traditionally like to assert their philosophy of peace. Once we meet, we are like brothers. That's an indigenous part of the indigenous philosophy. So I served in the military. I was in Panama for 3 years, and I happened to be there during the invasion. And I had made many Panamanian friends. I was in a local band, and after the invasion, obviously I could not meet my bandmates. I learned that some of my friends of my bandmates had died during the invasion, and I still live with a lot of the horrors that I saw during the invasion. So what I study in propaganda has much to do with why I say the things that I do about communications and media today. What I'd like to do is just try to answer the second question here, analysis of experiences of transformative communication. Well, social movements in Japan, they've begun using new media to reproduce their own story of resistance to the government's efforts to militarize even more Okinawa. If you don't know a great deal about Okinawa geopolitically, geographically, it's very close to Taiwan, very close to Shanghai, but the geography is such that it represents 0.6 of the entire landmass of Japan mainland. So 0.6 of the land is occupied by more than 70% of the US military. So the Okinawans have long had a very serious problem with this, and they've been trying to, for many years, 74 years, to change the conditions so that mainland Japan can at least take on more of the burden of the defense situation. So there are some really interesting movements that are going on in Okinawa. The Okinawan students have borrowed a movement that developed in Tokyo by students of the elite universities. It was called SEALS. That stands for Students Emergency Action for Liberal Democracy. It's kind of interesting. We can talk later about the meaning of liberal democracy in Japan, what that really means. So this group formed in Tokyo in order to challenge the government's new security legislation. Students in Okinawa saw that there was some possibility, as they organized, that maybe they can do something too about what's happening in their own backyards. And they developed a sealed Okinawa in order to organize a kind of wider resistance against the government's ongoing efforts to further militarize the northern part of the island. So university students in journalism and communications and political science in Okinawa and the mainland already had those skills to write and develop their own new media and document their efforts to create documentaries, digital documentaries, and to use the platform YouTube. They use YouTube really to get their message out. So that was a couple years ago, but if you've been paying attention to what's been happening to Google and YouTube, you realize that they are essentially becoming the bad cops. They're shutting down free speech. The normative analysis of the conditions.
Perhaps we can continue with other case studies of living experiences,
okay,
and then we move on altogether to the normative analysis.
All right.
But I would also give an applause. So any of you wants to begin with specific cases of communication justice?
Si quisiera mencionar los recicladores electrónicos, I'd like to mention the electronic recyclers, porque como ya te dije, mucha gente en este sector son en el trabajo informal. Many people working in this sector are operating as informal labor. No tienen protecciones estatales, no tienen derechos civiles, etc., etc. They don't have state protection, they don't have civil rights, etc. Y muchas también son jóvenes, many are very young. Y hay ejemplos muy catastróficos de la enfermedad que están experimentando. There are many cases, horrific ones around the world, of the diseases that they suffer. Pero una cosa interesante en términos de rebalancear, ¿no?, la distribución del conocimiento entre el norte global y el sur global, en donde el sur global puede ser el sujeto de conocimiento, no solo el objeto de conocimiento. But very interestingly, in terms of attempts to rebalance the intellectual exchange between the global north and the global south, where folks in the global south can be subjects rather than objects of knowledge, la mayoría de la epidemiología sobre estas personas viene desde Brasil, de India, de Nigeria, de Ghana, no de Suecia, no de Noruega, no de Canadá, no de los Estados Unidos. Most of the knowledge about this in epidemiological form comes from West Africa, South America, India, not from Sweden, Norway, the classic places in the global north, United States, Canada, etc. Y la otra cosa es que se está intentando organizar estos recicladores de una manera internacional. The other thing is there are attempts to organize these workers internationally. Es muy difícil porque en muchos casos no son alfabetizados. In many cases they are not alphabetized, I guess we say, no? La palabra incorrecta, literate. The old use in English would be literate.
Take.
Es peligroso, ¿no?
Sí, es peligroso.
Está-
Información es muy
Y
peligroso, muy mala para
es
la
totalmente
sociedad.
capitalista y
Ponle
no
un
es...
letrero que indique cuántas calorías tiene.
No,
Exacto, gracias.
Sí.
No, el principio de precaución y no el análisis de costos y beneficios. Principle of precaution, not of cost benefits, que es el punto con tu teléfono.
Ya.
Pero bueno, Entonces, a estos intentos de organizar los recicladores, there is attempts to organize these workers, often made by themselves, y entrar al sector más formal en donde se puede utilizar el discurso de derechos, enter into the formal sector where one can use this language of rights. Y también hay intentos de conectar los recicladores informales y las personas trabajando en las fábricas de estos dispositivos para crear conexión trabajador-trabajador. There are attempts to connect these workers in the informal sector in recycling with workers who are manufacturing these devices. Y finalmente, hay intentos pedagógicos, finally there are pedagogic attempts, de cambiar la mentalidad de muchas alumnas, para verse como no solo usuario de estos dispositivos comunicativos, pero como trabajadores. There are attempts pedagogically to change the minds of students so they can see themselves not just as users of these devices, como clientes, like consumers, but as co-workers, ¿no? Como trabajadores quienes están en la misma línea del proceso, como las personas en las minas, las personas en las fábricas y después las personas en las basuras electrónicas. Como people who are in part of a labor process that is connected to those who are mining, manufacturing, and after consumer life, disposing of these devices. Gracias, thank you. No, perdí mi público.
Well, I think people aren't quite sure whether they have a right to clap, a right to clap now or not. Yeah. Maybe this goes to Jorge's point about, the opinion you want to express, but do you have a right to express it, and that you're going to be allowed to express it. No, you're absolutely right. The mere fact that we have information doesn't mean that we necessarily will take better decisions. I'm saying that having a certain amount of information is, I would argue, is a precondition for taking good decisions, because taking decisions without information is, you may take bad decisions, although we all do it every day. And the point about whether we take decisions even when we are informed that something is bad for us. We take decisions based on emotions, impulses, whatever. So I totally understand that what I'm saying is not the mere fact of having information necessarily means that decision making alone will be improved. And I think this goes also to what you're saying, Toby, as well, that if we're really going to have a debate about the manufacturing chain for mobile phones or whatever it is, where are we getting the information from? What are the information sources? Do we really have complete information in order to be able to take those decisions? And what is the role then that media plays in that, and what are the responsibilities, moral responsibility at least, on the media and journalists to ensure that different voices are being represented in the media space? And how do we, for those of us who care about environmental issues, for example, or public health, how do we ensure that those debates take place? One of the ways that I work on that, or try to contribute to doing that, is, for example, by trying to make lobbying more transparent. I've done a huge amount of work in the last few years on opening up lobbying at the European Union, using the right of access to information to get information from European Union. The EU, Brussels, is the second biggest lobby capital in the world after Washington. A huge amount of lobbying takes place there. And we don't yet have full information about it, but we've made significant progress in getting more information about the way that lobbying influences decision making in Brussels, in having a register of lobbyists, which is not yet a mandatory register, and exposing lobbying around climate, energy, health, tobacco lobby, for example, the lobbyists from Monsanto, trying to get information about that. There are court cases currently ongoing to get more information about how decisions are taken and the role of the lobbyists in those decisions. So we're not there yet. I'm not maybe answering the success stories and saying what are the practical challenges that we still have, I think we know what the problems are, but have we solved them? And this goes back to what you were saying, Jorge, as well. We have an idea. It's like with the, we're talking of mobiles and what we click and what we say yes to. We've got the General Data Protection Regulation, which should empower all of us to control what data about us is collected, at least a bit more than we had before. And yet I, every single day, find myself forced to say yes to something without having been able to control the data that's collected because the regulations have been badly implemented. Of course I could, and sometimes I do just get out of the website and decide not to use that website, but there are other times when I'm like, oh, okay, I've tried to go to the choices, it sends me to other websites, I've tried to deactivate the data collection, and then I just give up and say no. And as a last point on this section in terms of some of the issues that we're talking about, trying to link transparency to the media space, another issue that I've been working on, my organization's been working on, and a whole network of people around Europe and globally have been working on in the last few years, is transparency of the ownership of the media and transparency of public funding of the media through state-sponsored advertising by public bodies. There is still great difficulty getting that information in many countries. So we still don't really have a clear picture in many countries about who the ultimate or beneficial owners of the media are. And we still have great difficulty getting data on how much money's gone in of unofficial subsidies to the media through the purchase of advertising. If we're concerned about creating media spaces in which different medias can flourish, in which community and local media can really begin to prosper, then that's because someone mentioned earlier in the first session, someone mentioned the economic challenges. I don't know if it's one of these ladies here, but the economic challenges for the media in terms of trying to survive, let alone the kind of regulation and censorship and so forth, but just the economic challenge. If you're not in a media environment which is really a level playing field, because of the use of advertising, for example, to support media that are favourable to particular interests, that's really a problem. So I think that that's another area where much more work could be done. We've made some progress in recent years in some countries that has advanced, but there are many countries where that still is a significant challenge. You don't have, really? It's fine. Let's just get on with it. I've got to get to lunch, come on.
Yeah, just extend the point that you're making about ownership. I've been seeing problems. I look at how Google, for example, and are delisting, deplatforming, marginalizing dissident voices, and yeah, it's pretty frightening what's happening. What can be done?
But can I just respond to that very briefly? I mean, this is a whole nother area. There's so many big issues that you're trying to address in an hour panel. It's hard to know where to start. We had, up until the sort of real into this new era that we're in, we had, for example, we were making progress on defining freedom of expression, who limits freedom of expression. There's an enormous amount of jurisprudence, at least from the European Court of Human Rights and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, about who takes decisions about censorship, about the limits on freedom of expression, and how that's done. And we suddenly seem to have thrown all of that out of the window, and nobody wants to take nobody on the regulatory side has really stepped up to the mark to take responsibility for and having a proper debate about how we regulate some of the problems that we're seeing with information that's circulating. And we're doing what seems to me is that the worst possible thing, which is leaving it to large private monopolistic companies to regulate freedom of expression. And how do we get to that point about after all the work? You mentioned at the beginning that I started working on freedom of expression. In fact, for the AMARC people here, I was at an AMARC conference in Dublin in 1990, if I'm not wrong. And for the IAMCR people, I was at an IAMCR, or pre-IAMCR possibly, event in Bratislava in 1993, just to give my media freedom credentials. I've now moved on to the right of access to information. It's incredibly, I don't have all the answers, but we need to have a proper discussion about this, and it's not happening. It's really not happening, and I'm shocked at the extent to which we're not having this discussion, and I think we're going to see some very nasty consequences if we don't move really fast on this.
It's pretty shocking.
It's shocking.
Just 2 sentences.
Yeah.
No more regulation in the United States since the 1980s. It was one of the
That's right.
first primary moves of the neoliberal capitalism, and you're talking about American capitalist organizations. So it's not a puzzle.
No,
So,
it's not.
but I'm
Someone
just-
mentioned the sort of McBride report, and I was
So
suddenly
with
remembering all the controversies about
After
UNESCO and
For
everything.
exactly in response to the McBride report.
Yeah.
The Global South and some groups in the North organized, and the US decided to go around it, created a neoliberal capitalist moment, and one of the first things they did was not only get out of UN and UNESCO and stop paying money to them,
Yeah.
the second thing was get rid of any media regulation. And it took maybe 5 or
Yes,
6
and yet there
years.
is media regulation in the United States. It's a total myth, and I saw this I worked in Central and Eastern Europe during the 1990s, and seeing all the discourse coming from certain American actors about the fact that in the United States there's no media regulation. Well, that's not really true. Exactly, but
There's regulation around intellectual property.
well, yes, and there was regulation on access to the airwaves and so forth.
Right. But not in terms of freedom.
But that's changed
Not in
since
terms of freedom of
2010.
expression, yeah.
Citizens United versus the FEC.
Perhaps, Daniel, you can speak a little bit more about proposals of regulation to foster social justice communication. And I think we still have to continue thinking about the state, but also about citizen regulation of the internet and the media's accounts. Yeah? And that's also very important, the role of social movements in civil society.
Well, what Google and YouTube seem to be doing nowadays seems to mimic what China has been doing with its, panopticon communications, linking our social activity, our social media activity, with our ability to reproduce our lives, being able to make a living. When you say the wrong thing, being marginalized, being disciplined by these platforms. So in China and India, where money has become digitized, there seems to be a real threat to human autonomy and agency, especially in India and China right now. And it seems to me that with the connection that Japan is beginning to make next year, that when you speak out of line, there are plenty of laws right now in place where if you speak out of line or if you challenge what the government is challenge their policies. In Okinawa, militarism is huge, and if you're caught, if you're seen as challenging what the government is talking about, challenging the government's plans, you can be penalized. And now the threats are to our ability to make a living. So I don't see how right now we can.
Perhaps Jorge can help us out with this.
Let's see. You might find some answers in this beautiful book, by the way. Self-promotion here. It's actually part of the experiences I will bring in. Now, indeed, I will not bring experiences. I'm just going to take from these experiences and give some comments. But talking about this idea of transformative communication, can I ask you something? Can you raise your hand? Those who believe that when you say the word America, think in a country? The ones when I say America, think in a country. Please, can you raise your hand?
The US.
Depends on the context.
Yeah.
If I say
The audience.
America, talking to some place on Earth, would you say I'm talking about a continent or a country?
Mainly outside, they talk about just one country.
I'm just very briefly. When I say America,
I
I live in America. Where do you think I live?
I would
The
say
US.
it differently in English and Spanish.
Okay, but if let's say, okay, I was all the time thinking, what if I'm kidnapped by some, let's say, this is not very politically correct, let's say I'm kidnapped by a terrorist, and he asks me, are you American? What would I say?
No one would say yes.
I'm Irish or
So-
something. Yeah.
Canadiense, Canadiense.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about basic actions like talking and naming things. And how can this be part of what grandiloquently we say transformative communication? And that would be by